Hi everyone, I'm G2 MMA and I'm here to share my thoughts on Lerone Murphy versus Movsar Evloev, bruv. Alright, so let's get into it and talk about Leo Murphy, bruv. Alright, a lot of comparisons with his fellow Englishman, Leon Edwards, and I totally see it. It seems like they mass produce point fighters up there, but Lerone is more of a counterpuncher. Uh, with solid skills as well. Most fans would say that he's boring to watch, but that's because we are used to MMA striking, where there's a lot of volume, a lot of throwing up Hail Mary shots, power punches, none of that sweet science, relatively uh, less of that. But, if you put Lerone in a boxing match, be he will be pretty much as entertaining as any boxer, to be honest. So, alright. My point here is that he got the striking skills. Alright. In fact, he has high level IQ and timing, especially against wrestlers like Pico and Americani. But he's considered boring because of his game plan, mm, which is to find a perfect counter, like what they did to Pico and Americani as well. And then if you can find a counter, or you can just knock a guy out, he's not the strongest ever, but he'll start point fighting instead. More like in his fight against Josh Emmett. Yeah, he can really knock out Josh Emmett. Even Ilya can't knock him out, so he just outscored him. Anyways, let's talk about his finishes. Most people consider those as lucky shots, but I beg to differ because those strikes are deliberate. They're not Hail Mary punches, like I said. Uh, First, with that knee against Americani, Lerone knew that he was coming in for a takedown. And then he does what everyone says they will do when a wrestler shoots. The only difference is that Lerone actually got the timing and the reflexes to do it. Alright. But before he did that, he got taken down. Now remember that detail, alright? Now, now with the picture perfect spinning elbow against Aaron Pico. That's a thing of beauty. Lerone read Pico's movement and made an adjustment and simply caught him with that elbow. Pico would come in and step to the side, so all he has to do was to spin and let it rip. Now, if he caught him with an overhand or a hook, I might call it the lucky shot, but that elbow was too perfect to be just a fluke. However, same with the Americani fight, he was also taken down by Aaron Pico. This goes to show that somehow his wrestling defense, what am I saying? His reflexes and timing doesn't work with wrestling defense. Now, imagine what Evloev would do to him once he's down, This guy literally put Aljo in the worst position of his life. Once he gets Lerone in the ground, the chance of Lerone getting him with the counter immediately goes to zero, of course. And the chance that Movsar Evloev takes Lerone down is almost 100%. In short, the odds are heavily stacked against Lerone Murphy. I think the UFC is setting him up here, but that won't be really good because this is a title eliminator fight. Title contender eliminator fight, and I bet you $500 that they won't match up Movsar Evloev against Volkanovski. Anyways, you might be saying that, of course, these are wrestlers, and Lerone Murphy is a striker. Of course, they're gonna take him down. They have great wrestling ability. They'll probably dominate Lerone Murphy in the ground. But what about Unk of the Year Josh Emmett? He lifted Lerone Murphy like a kid. Look at here. Look at Lerone Murphy. He's literally staring at the ground right now. Alright, a 40-year-old boxer lifted him and threw him to the ground. Now let that sink in, bro. Now, with Movsar Evloev, alright, we all know him as a wrestler, as a grappler, but he can also lay down volume. His striking is not bad at all. He can hang with Lerone in that department, for sure. But somehow, all wrestlers are pressure fighters, and Movsar is no exception. He's very aggressive and a very forward pressure fighter. And that is perfect for Lerone to find a counter. A counter is possible, yeah, but I'm not betting on that. And remember, Movsar landed more significant strikes against Diego Lopez in their fight, so his striking is nothing to scoff at. Now, it is looking like Movsar is more of a well-rounded fighter than Lerone, and if that is what you think, I can totally agree with you on that. Anyways, the bottom line is Lerone Murphy is fucked once they're on the ground. His best chance is a counter on the feet, which is not out of the picture, at least. But again, I'm not betting on that. I'm not betting on that. Both of these guys are undefeated fighters. They're undefeated for a reason. It's like it's a classic. This is a classic striker versus grappler matchup. And in that case, historically, probably won't grapple here in this fight. Movsar will try to grapple with Lerone Murphy. Lerone Murphy will get out of it and then find a counter. That is the best scenario for Lerone Murphy, but again, I'm not betting on that. I want him to win. I want Lerone Murphy to win because I want division to move. There's no way that if Movsar wins, they're gonna match him up with Volkanovski. There's just no way, because obviously this is a contender eliminator fight. But again, I doubt that if Movsar wins, the UFC will let him fight Volk. Do you think they will let a boring grappler fight Volk? If that's what they want, they wouldn't put Diego Lopez against him 2 times. The UFC prioritizes entertainment value before anything, and that's why they made him fight Diego Lopez twice. Matter of fact, John Silva will probably fight Volk first, even if Movsar wins. Probably not if Lerone wins. Lerone will probably get the shot, but if Movsar wins, they probably let John Silva first. And this guy looked the same, actually. Wow, they look the same. No, John Silva and Volk, they look the same. Anyways, which doesn't make any sense because John Silva got beat by Diego Lopez. And Volk already beat Diego Lopez twice. And in addition to that, Movsar already beat Diego Lopez. Anyways, but in terms of entertainment value, John Silva versus Volk will be the most likely for the UFC. That because that's what they're prioritizing right now. And anyways, that's all I got for you today. Let me know your thoughts down below. Like and subscribe, and I will see you all next time. Bye.